Well, this is number 11 in a series that I've been doing on coping with change, based loosely upon a manuscript that I have ready for publication that right now its working title is Christians in Wonderland, talking about the changes that our faith and people of our faith have had to deal with. If you've tuned in so far, you can already see that I'm rambling, and so it's just 10 minutes, but I try to ramble around the different thoughts in the book. Some of these subjects are pretty dense, and they have technical terms, and I'm trying to break it down so that mom and pop out there can get some kind of a grasp on what we're dealing with. I know that we're having a lot of differences of opinion about lots of things that I don't mean to say they're superficial in the sense of not important, but they're kind of on the surface. But there's a change that has happened at a much deeper level that I'm trying to get at, so everyone will be able to understand why their neighbors or grandchildren or whatever are thinking so differently than they are. In this session, I'd like to talk about information theory, because I believe that the power of our postmodern world comes from 4 breakthroughs in science. The term itself comes from literature, but the power of it, the power of change, comes from 4 major breakthroughs that occurred in the 20th century, 3 of them, and 1 of them in the 21st century. The first one was the theory of relativity by Albert Einstein in 1901. I believe I have that date correct, where he published his first theory of relativity, and the second one in 1913, I think. But anyway, there's a major shift in the way that we saw the universe, that nothing was constant except the speed of light in the universe. Then quantum mechanics, which occurred in the first 15 years or so of the century, of the 20th century, which dealt with the subatomic particles on which atoms and molecules rest and all. And then the Genome Project, which we'll deal with at some length, where we learned that all life is a machine language, a biological machine language, and that all forms of life that we have encountered so far share this machine language. It's a common machine language. And the human genome now has been mapped, and there is essentially a human genome English dictionary and this occurred in the first 10 years of this century, the 21st century. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about information theory. In 1947, Claude Shannon published a paper, a technical paper, with Bell Laboratories Systems in their magazine. And he had no idea that it was going to be the breakthrough document that it was. He was just trying to solve a problem of the telephone company of how to send messages over long distances without distortion, because we're sending more and more messages. So how are we going to send millions of messages over the same wires without distortion over long distances? But the result of this paper was he brought together numbers of theories and technical breakthroughs, and he synthesized a kind of a way of looking at information that was going to prove to be a world changer. And out of this, of course, came our computers and internet and all of that. Now, there had been computers before. Arguably, there was an analog computer in the Byzantine Empire, which I discussed earlier, which we found in the late 1960s, but we didn't know what it was until fairly recently, with being able to have imaging inside the apparatus. There was a great analog computer created in 1871 by Charles Babbage at enormous cost, and it was run by steam, and it could have worked, but finally they he couldn't bring it to fruition with the technology of the day, and so the funding was cut eventually. But he was processing not just numbers but thought. These systems with Charles Babbage, and then of course later with Claude Shannon, drew on Boolean algebra, which deals with how to represent logical operations with just yes and no. So that's a 1 and a 0 in binary operations, or turning a switch on and off. But Claude Shannon had the good fortune that right at the time that he published his paper, also the transistors were coming into being. During the war, of course, Alan Turing had solved the Enigma device of the Germans, and there's all kinds of movies about that. It's a really interesting thing. And so that also had something to do with it. But Claude Shannon brought all this together in a single document, and it's led to not only a revolution in technology, but a revolution in thought. And I think that information theory most certainly ought to be categorized along with genetics and the two great theories that happen in physics, quantum mechanics, and theory of relativity, and as being the game changers. And these all came within a few decades of one another, and they've altered the world. One of the ways they've altered the world is that increasing number of young physicists wonder if we're not living in a computer simulation ourselves. And that's easy to see how someone of that generation can come to this. I play a relatively simple computer game from time to time, and you build cities, and then you have wars, and so it's a pretty involved game. But you start with nothing, and after a while, your game is operating in ways you're not quite can predict, and so it builds up. You're the author of it, but it's unpredictable in many ways, and so and very realistic, and increasingly realistic. Of course, you can look in a few decades ahead, maybe not that long, and see people wearing helmets and entering a whole created space that human beings have made out of information. And you can understand why young physicists are asking if we're not in a simulation. Another thing that happens, of course, is that as we look at computers and how they operate, then some people, particularly non-Christians or non-traditional thinkers, would say, what is the difference between my computer or my artificial intelligence program and me? I am an intelligent being made of meat, and they're an intelligent creation made of silicon. And these are the kinds of ideas that are very, very common out in our universities and out on the internet as well, and you can look them up. Just type in your Google, "Are we living in a simulation?" and you'll see all kinds of things, most of it nonsense, but some of it really speculative things that have real depth. So I've got to bring this one to an end, but the question is here, and we're dealing from a Christian standpoint, how does a Christian feel about this? Well, Christian, are we living in a simulation, for example? That's a new question, but not really. It's a new question because of computers and the internet. But the church fathers dealt with this in the first 5 centuries. And the answer is yes and no. Because the universe is created out of word, according to the Apostle John and the book of Hebrews. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which appear are made of things which do not. So all through the New Testament, there's these references, and in the church fathers as well, which is the first 5 centuries of Christian writings, we get this idea that, yes, we live in a created universe, and it's created out of word and called Logos, and this Logos is embedded in every single thing, including me, which is how I am able to reason and come to conclusions about things, because the Logos in me recognizes the Logos in everything else. It's a very highly complicated system of thought that was neglected in the modern era, and now we can see it really is quite present of our own era, and is a Christian answer to these questions that are emerging in a postmodern era. I know this is really nerdy stuff, and perhaps this is new for you that's listening, but I assure you that I am not talking about really just speculative things you would find in the National Enquirer or something. I'm talking about really solid information that you can check out for yourself on the internet. And by the way, you're always welcome to correct me. I don't want to be putting false things out on the internet. We have enough of that already. So thank you for listening. This is on information theory. If you want to go on Wikipedia and look up the name Claude Shannon, you can see that for yourself. And as always, I would welcome any thoughts you may have about this.